Hounda, good afternoon and a very warm welcome. Many of you will have joined us here at St. Padon's for one of our previous webinars, but if not, my name is Chris Burr and I have responsibility here for continuing ministerial development. So we're just going to go through some practicalities about today. So helping me run the webinar this afternoon are two of my CMD colleagues, which are Veronica Cottam and Jennifer Riggs. Tomorrow, of course, is Ash Wednesday, the beginning of Lent, and Easter Sunday itself is just 47 days away. Now, last year, of course, lockdown was introduced just a matter of weeks before Easter, leaving many churches little time to adapt. And although we don't quite know yet exactly what Holy Week and Easter 2021 are going to look like, we do know that once again, it's going to be very different. So to try and help us explore some of the challenges and opportunities of this Easter, we're holding a series of 3 webinars. Today's webinar is the first of these and will be led by our great friend and colleague, the Reverend Dr. Sandra Millar. This will be followed by 2 further webinars next Tuesday, February the 23rd, and then another 2 weeks today on Tuesday, March the 2nd. Both of those, as you can see on your screen, will start at 2 p.m. As I said, many of you will have attended one of these webinars before, but please bear with me as I briefly run through the format for any that haven't been with us previously. Sandra will speak for around 45 minutes today, and that will be followed by our usual Q&A session, which will last up to 30 minutes. But either way, we'll finish on time at 3:15. Please don't worry if during the webinar your dog starts barking in the background, or your phone starts ringing, or the Amazon man starts knocking at the door. Other than contributors and facilitators, you will automatically be muted for the duration of the webinar. If you've got a question for Sandra today, please post those as we go along via the Q&A function. You can see it there on the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. And we'll use as many of those questions as we can at the end. We may not be able to use all of them, but we will do our very best in the time that we have. And if you want to post a question anonymously, you can do that if you prefer. Some of you might also want to offer some comments or thoughts as you go along. And if that's the case, then use the chat facility on the bar at the bottom of your screen. And you can control who sees the post in the chat box. You can post a message just for the panelists, for Sandra or myself if you choose, but most people will choose to share their comment so that everybody else can see it. And if that's the case, just make sure that you click on all panelists and attendees. And don't panic if your toolbar disappears. If it fades out, it's because it's inactive. Just move your mouse or touch the screen and it'll reappear. If you miss anything today, again, don't panic. You want to revisit something that Sandra said, all of these webinars are recorded and that will be uploaded to the St. Padon's website within the next couple of days. And finally, you'll automatically receive a feedback request via email in the next couple of days. It's very short, very straightforward, but we would be extremely grateful if you could take a moment to do that. We do read every one and they're invaluable in helping us to plan our other webinars as we go along. So there we go. That's the outline of our webinar this afternoon. There are over 70 of us attending this afternoon. So hopefully you'll appreciate why, unfortunately, we can't make these any more interactive than they are. It's a webinar, not a Zoom meeting, and therefore we're unable to show everybody on screen, but it's really good to have you with us. As I said, I'll be back to facilitate some Q&As a little bit later on and host some discussion, but high time I hand it over to our speaker today. No stranger to us here in the Church in Wales. Sandra, a very warm welcome, and we look forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Thank you, Chris. Are you going to pray or would you like me to pray?
Oh, I'd love you to pray, Sandra.
Okay, let me pray before I share the screen for us all today. Lord our God, we give you thanks for this day, for this opportunity to gather together, for the wonders of this technology that in this season allows us to meet and to share. Thank you for each and every person present and the ministry that they have, the gifts they bring. Help us to share the good news of your love revealed in Jesus at Easter. Help us to listen well, to know the presence of your Holy Spirit inspiring us through this time. In Jesus' name, amen. And now as I'm praying, my voice was giving up. So excuse me for coughing. Let me share my screen with you. And hopefully at this point, I've got a slightly different beginning slide. We'll all be on the same experience. And say it's very good to be with you today. Those of you who don't know me, many of you will have perhaps heard me before, but I live in Gloucester. So I'm not speaking to you from London or Kent or anywhere, but really just across the estuary in Gloucester. We share borders across the county. So it always makes me feel closer to the church in Wales. And it's really good to be sharing with you. Much of what I'm saying has got a similar pattern to the way we thought about Christmas, but I'll share some specific ideas and challenges and themes as we go through. But as with all these times that we spend together, our intention, my intention is always just to help us, whatever situation we're in, to have confidence in what we're doing at the moment. To feel that we're doing something good and worthwhile, however small it is, and to not be worried that we're not doing certain things, but to really feel that we've got something good to say. It's also our core intention, really, in everything that we do, to think about how we make connections with people. And so some of what I'll share is about how that happens as well, particularly in this season, both in this season in our culture and this season in the church as well. And that means when we think about connection, we are thinking very much beyond our doors. Now, the logo that you can see on the screen that says opening the doors is a Church of England logo. We originally developed it when we had all had high hopes last summer that something amazing was going to happen and we were all going to open up again. Of course, we're not in that situation, and yet we've decided to keep using it again, opening the doors, in that wider sense of having open hearts almost, that we're opening up our spaces so that people can encounter the heart of our message in this season and make those connections with the church, that some of which have been lost in this last year, those tangential connections that people make. How do we continue to do that? And how do we make sure that we're including as many people as possible? And we'll be thinking about some of those groups. And you've heard me say this before, but what we're about really all the time is the art of the possible. Let's do what we can, not what we can't at the moment. And really, more and more, I think we're learning this whole skill of thinking about what we're doing is making memories for people. I've been very influenced in a lot of the work I do by reading some of the things, not great theological tomes, but some of the insights that come from retail, actually, and from research that looks at what makes people become returning customers, what makes people make a second choice to come and do something again. And that's really fascinating. And it turns out that one of the absolute key things is the memories that we have laid down, that we have a good memory of something. That means that the next time we encounter that, or the next situation we come across, we have something to draw upon that says, oh, that was good. So it's an important moment for us as people of followers of Jesus Christ, people of the church, that we're helping everyone to make good memories of who we are at this time, so that whether it's this year, next year, or a few years' time, they've got something that says, oh, that was special. That was special, the way the church responded and was there for us in that season. And of course, when we start thinking about Easter, I think in an interesting way, Easter is our heart. In many ways, when we talk about Christmas, what we're doing is something that is very much owned by the people. I tell a story about a toddler group where people got cross with me because and the phrase was, we hate it when the church messes with the story, because to some extent everyone owns the story of Christmas. It's on the cards, it's everywhere. Whereas actually this story that we're about to begin journeying with from tomorrow, the story that takes us through the events of Holy Week to the cross and then to the resurrection, is absolutely the heart of who we are as the church. and it's a message that's really precious to us and important. But it's a more difficult message for many in our culture beyond the church to know, perhaps lost touch with it, and to relate to. So when we do encounter people, whoever they are, we are still in that place where welcome is important, where we show delight when we meet them, whatever way we're contacting them. Where, of course, in this season, whatever we do, we think about how we do it well with safety, how we communicate what we're doing clearly, and manage expectations. Even though it's less well known, people have a surprising amount of cultural memory about certain practices that come, certain seasons and days that come in the next few weeks. And we'll touch on those and how we trigger those with people and help them to remember them, and yet to know that this year it won't be exactly the same. And of course, that will begin with tomorrow and the ashing. And also holding on to this fact that when we do things differently, it doesn't mean that it's inferior. And I think we've learned that a lot this year. In the beginning, many of us were really anxious that whatever we did was never going to be quite like the real thing. But we've learned that the real thing is everything that we do. However we do it is real for people. And just because it's not the same as it was last year doesn't mean it will be worse. Although for it to be different and good does require us to give some thought to things. So as we go into this season, it's worth taking a moment just to think about what are some of the themes and some of our thoughts as we go into this season. And I'm sure you'll all be doing your own things, preparing yourself to journey through Lent. And in some ways, it's an odd one, isn't it? Because the last thing that any of us are thinking we can ask of ourselves and certainly ask of others is giving up things this Lent. You know, today is Pancake Day, Shrove Tuesday. And I, just because one needs little varieties in life at the moment, I will make pancakes. Pancakes for one is always a good thing. I will make pancakes. And I tell myself I might eat up some chocolate, but actually I won't really. There'll still be chocolate in the cupboard because it's not feeling like a Lent to give up, because we've been living through the longest Lent for a year now, nearly, where people have given up so much. They've given up the things that in many ways are essential to making us feel human, hugging people, meeting people, going out, having new experiences, laying down new memories. So people already feel they've given up much. So maybe this Lent has a different feel. For myself, I've been thinking a lot about the discipline of joy. That maybe in this Lent, one of the themes we're talking about with people is how do we dig deep to keep holding on to hope and joy? You will have your own particular thoughts about how that works. But somehow, as we make this journey, this very real journey through Lent to the cross and beyond, we need to recognize this year in a very particular way the realities of people's lives. And as I talk through some of the dates that are coming up, one of the things we've got to think about is being real about where people are, the pain that people are already in, being careful that what we say, especially perhaps around something like Good Friday, doesn't just sound trite in a year when people have endured so much and suffered so much in terms of loss and grief. And holding on in a very particular way this year to that great message of hope. Now, I hope you'll forgive me for saying this, and I don't want it to seem like a bit of a characterization, but across our churches, we often have slightly different ways of engaging with Holy Week and Easter. And I largely was formed as a young Christian in an evangelical tradition. And a lot of the time in those churches, we kind of seem to go to church for Palm Sunday. And yes, we did talk a bit about Good Friday and sing When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, but really we were at Easter very quickly. And I didn't know anything about things like Easter Eve vigils, about Maundy Thursday watches, all of that every evening in Holy Week. I didn't know anything about that until much later when my liturgical and theological experience deepened and widened in different ways. And then there are churches, if you like, that are absolutely really, really good at taking us on that intense journey through to Good Friday and Holy Saturday. But sometimes some of that gets lost when we get to the resurrection, and the story of the resurrection is overshadowed by the fact that we've had the whole dramatic story the week before. And this year we'll have to work really hard to keep those two things together, the story of the cross and the story of the resurrection. I find the old phrase running in my head a lot, you know, it's Friday, but Sunday's coming. And perhaps the message of hope we're going to be focusing on through this Lent, Holy Week and Easter is that message of hope that it is Friday. That's the reality in people's lives. We are in the longest Lent, but we have that great hope in the resurrection. And more than ever this year, we need to keep that in view. And we do have a great and particular advantage in the Northern Hemisphere, which is that for us, Lent, and indeed the very word Lent has got some links to the word lengthen. Lent is about the coming of spring. I always feel it might be interesting to spend more of Lent thinking about it in the Southern Hemisphere, where the imagery of new life isn't all around you. It's a different feel. But for us, it is. And that's a helpful thing for many people and for us to think about as we think about outdoor spaces at the moment. And as we think about the cross and the resurrection and those messages that we're working with and living through in this season. We also think very much about all the different people that we might engage with. And as I said, in some ways, because Lent Easter is our story, we may find ourselves focusing a lot on how we're meeting the needs of those who are already church attenders. And we may even want to split those into a couple of groups at the moment. We may have those who have been very regular with us, who we've seen on our Zoom church or seen in other ways. It's hard if we're doing Facebook Live always to know who's present to us. But there will be people who did attend our church who maybe have not connected with us in digital worship. We may want to be thinking about those as well. And then thinking about those fringe people, many of whom maybe are families who are connecting with other activities, usually connecting through toddler groups, connecting through messy churches. How are we communicating this great story with them? And then, although it doesn't feel always like the story that belongs to the community, where are the places where we connect with the community beyond the church? And how do we connect with people in the different circumstances of their lives? Because right now there are people in all kinds of circumstances, people living alone and completely on their own, people working at home, people who are actually living a fairly normal life in terms of the routine that they have to do because they work in things like retail or in the caring sectors or in manufacturing, and they are at work. There are people who have lost their jobs, people who are furloughed, all kinds of different circumstances that people are in. And in my head, I can't possibly draw this on a grid, on a screen. I was trying to think if I could, but almost I think as we approach this season, I kind of have in my head, ideally, of course, it would be a three-dimensional model, but at least a two-dimensional model where I put the different occasions across the top and then the different audiences and the different places where we want to encounter them and think about each event. Who's this for? How are they going to encounter this message? And ask myself those questions. And wherever they're happening, these are people who are on a faith journey. And that journey theme is really important in Lent, isn't it? Where we focus on our own journey towards God. And whichever of those places people are at, whether they've got little children, whether they're alone at home, whether they're in a care home, wherever they're meeting us, whether it's a digital worship or walking by your church in the community, something is going on a faith journey. They may be new completely to thinking about a Christian faith, or just new to thinking about it in the context of your place of worship. And they might be coming because they want to worship or just because you're putting on something that seems of interest. So holding on all the time to that sense of putting yourself in the shoes of those whom we want to meet and thinking about what's going on and what is working well is an important process in communicating and engaging with people at this time. And I've shown this slide. I think I show it practically in every presentation I do now, because I think it's so important that what we're in the business of doing when we meet people, whatever the season is helping them to make friends, not just with us, but to make friends ultimately with God through Jesus Christ. And right now, many people are in that bottom quadrant where it says fear and anxiety about so much in their lives, whether it's fear and anxiety about what the next stage is going to be, about whether life will ever be any different. And communicating at this time in a warm relational way that helps people to feel reassured that hope is there and build that sense of anticipation in the good news of God's love, so they move always onwards towards that relationship of trust and delight. If we only greet people always with cold kind of give them bits of information and don't back it up with warmth, then it's harder for them to feel reassured and confident, not just in what we're doing, but in the love of God that lies behind it. So, moving specifically on into this season, just a little bit on today, tomorrow and Lent, very briefly, because we're practically there. And I've mentioned pancakes already, and many people perhaps thought a bit about Valentine's Day as well, thought about love and how that frames the whole story that we're in at the moment. And tomorrow we'll be on Ash Wednesday, and hopefully you're all prepared for that. And we've been thinking about what that will feel like for people as we serve them, and as we reach out and think about what mortality means, perhaps in a very real way this year as we say those words. And then, of course, we actually have the season of Lent. We have the days and weeks to go through. And perhaps some of the things still to think about is what is going to happen each week. Is there something that can help mark Lent during the next few weeks? One of the difficulties we've all got at the moment is that in some ways time has become a complete blur because there are no milestones or staging posts for us on the journey. So how are there things you could be introducing each week in Lent that help people to keep a sense of this season unfolding and growing and changing? Can we introduce people not just to the words, as we do often in Lent with the Bible and with thinking more deeply, but also that whole sense of being out in creation and spotting the things that emerge on our journey through Lent? And I felt this year my word for Lent was not willpower of giving up things, but the willingness to take up things and to do something different as we make that journey. But as I say, we're already on that and we're on the threshold, so I don't want to talk too much about that. I'm going to talk instead about some other key dates and various things that we could be thinking about. And I've identified, outside of the big dates in Holy Week, 2 other important occasions. One you'll probably be familiar with and one you may not. So as you can see, I've used 2 names and I don't know whether this happens in Wales, and forgive me if it doesn't, how this works in Welsh. But the 14th of March is in the church called Mothering Sunday, but in our culture now it's almost certainly going to be called Mother's Day, and that's why I put both words up there, because sometimes we have to think about which audience we're speaking to. So how are we going to deal with that? And I'll come on and talk a bit more about it. The date you might not have heard of yet, but is actually a really significant date, and it was sort of launched at the weekend, and you may have seen something about it. It's spearheaded by Marie Curie nationally. When I say nationally here, I do mean UK. I'm careful in how I say that. And it's on the 23rd of March, and I'm going to say a little bit about what that might mean as well. Then, of course, week after that, we get into the great dates. What are we going to do with Palm Sunday, Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, and of course, Easter Day? And then that reminder that Easter is not actually just a day, it's a season. It's even longer than Christmas, isn't it? It's 6 weeks of Easter for us to think about how we speak hope into our churches, into our communities. So as we focus on this season, we do have to think differently about what we would usually call our services. And for me now, I talk about these things in terms of 4 spaces that we're working in, and they intersect. They're all interrelated in different ways. I'm still struggling with what's the right word to call them, and nothing seems quite the right word. But for now, today, I'm going to talk about public spaces, which is where there is at least the possibility that there might be more than one person, if not at present, at least on other occasions. So I mean our public indoor spaces and our public outdoor spaces. So for us, that might mean church buildings, it might mean church yards where we have them, and there will be some other community spaces as well. What do we do with those? And then, of course, there is our digital space, how we're using social media, how we're using streaming, etc. But really importantly now, with all of these, the interfaces, things are happening in domestic space. Things are happening in people's homes, in their family units, and for many, their home is now their workplace as well. This is an extraordinary, amazing season in which the words and liturgies of our faith, the words of scripture, the prayers are not being said over there, but right here in people's homes. There's an immense and perhaps unknown power in that for us to think about. And again, that reminder with all these spaces, this is not to say that you need to be thinking about doing something in every space, but just doing what you can within those spaces and just acknowledging that the different ones exist. And also adding another layer is spaces can be communal properly, public spaces, because this season is not just about us and what we do as the church. I think we're learning a lot at the moment about, as a church, the need to be humble. And for me, humility means partnering with others, accepting that we don't have all the answers. The day of reflection on the 23rd of March is going to be a great one for thinking about partnerships. Marie Curie already work out in the community. They're drawing on a lot of other charitable organisations, as well as other bereavement charities, other retirement organisations, other commercial partners as well as communication channels, celebrities and others, to communicate on this day of reflection. So it might be worth you thinking about who your partners would be. Working with our schools in different ways to share the good news. And you're in the position in Wales where your schools are going to be active a little bit open, building wise, they're all open all the time, a little bit sooner than they are for us in England. And then using the skills you find locally, people can get involved. And I guess the watchword in all this is going to be that flexibility that we'll need to have to adapt to the situation that we find ourselves as it unfolds. So thinking about outdoors and indoors, in fact, I'm primarily going to talk about outdoor spaces at the moment. All of us will be making decisions using our risk assessments and our consultations with others as to how much worship we feel that we're going to offer inside our buildings. But this year is a great occasion when we can explore our outdoor space. Now, when we think about outdoor space, both around our churches and in our communities, we just need to take care within the guidelines as to what we're promoting and encouraging people to do. So it's not about putting up great posters and saying, everybody come to the churchyard to do this, unless we feel that is a possibility by the time we get close to Easter. But it's that little sense of little things are available in the space that you can come and engage with. It's the prayer tree that might go up for Easter with a particular symbol on it. It might be the moment when you all do something at the same time on a certain day, like ashing tomorrow. There are other ways of doing outdoor prayer stations, and some of you may have come across a resource that originally came out of the Diocese of Gloucester called Experience Easter, published by Jumping Fish, and you can still get this resource. It was designed to bring schools and churches together in the community, and it has ideas for 6 very creative stations that explore the story. There is also something called Experience Easter Outdoors, but whilst we couldn't use them exactly as they are this year, they will give you a jumping off point for thinking about how perhaps to use the space that you have to create some prayer stations that explore the story of Easter. Many of us were very used to doing this in Advent, to having houses in our communities that had different scenes of the Nativity in. We're not as used to breaking up the Easter story that way. But perhaps there is something that can be done, that people might see images of the Easter story in its different stages as they walk around your community on their daily exercise. Take care about how you communicate that. Other people are using things like people bringing something of their own to bring to the church. So they might be bringing something like a stone that they have written a name on or a prayer on and placing it in a cairn. In one of the churches I'm involved with, that's proved incredibly popular. Others may be putting things in different places around the community that people spot on their daily walk, and that can be really helpful as well. And all these things get echoed by the use of social media, that you see something and you share the story and other people are blessed by it and know that it's going on. Make sure people know it's from you, it's from the local church when you do things. I got something through the post yesterday, which I'll say a bit more about in a moment, and it took me ages to work out which church had sent it, and that may be a good thing, but actually it made me think about how sometimes we don't always know. We take it so for granted that people will know it's from us that we forget to say clearly that it's us who are doing something in partnership with others in our community. Then we have these digital and domestic spaces, and we're all familiar with the different ways we use digital, whether we stream, whether we're Zoom church, how we're doing it, and how we use social media as well. But really think carefully about how you're using social media to share messages during Lent, Holy Week and Easter. If you've got a church Facebook page, what are you putting up? If you've got an Instagram feed, what images are you putting up that enable people to engage with the journey through to Holy Week and Easter, remembering those different audiences and how well or not well they might know the story. And also remember that for many people they will be engaging with worship through old-fashioned broadcast media. They might be listening to the radio, they may be watching on TV, they may be using the Daily Hope helpline. How do we help those people to feel that what they're doing is valid and valuable? And one of the best ways of doing this is the way we use and reinforce what they're watching, whether that's social media, streamed, whether that's broadcast media, by giving them something to do alongside that. And this is where we might send a prayer in the post on a card that people could read, even if they're watching or listening to a radio broadcast, then they could have a prayer. Encouraging people to do the lighting a candle, the physical action as they watch is really important. And also sometimes doing that at the same time. That's why things like deciding that at 6 o'clock in the evening we're all going to light a candle or whatever can have a real resonance, that sense that you're not on your own, we're all doing something at the same time. Now, it might be across a nation, but it might well just be in your village where you decide that on Palm Sunday there'll be a moment when everybody will place their palm cross into a window or something like that. And that idea that you send things through the letterbox is really important, things that arrive in people's homes. So a little bit about the different days now and different ideas that we can have. You'll have millions of better ideas, but there's lots of things to think about. What can we do with Mothering Sunday? Mothering Sunday has now been in our culture, and it's already out there, the advertising, it's only a month away, has very much been positioned as a day to treat your mum. But it's really important to remember something this year, or two somethings. This is, although it's not the literal date when lockdown began, or not, which was actually the 23rd of March, we'll come on to that in a moment, but actually it was the first major event last year when we could not meet our families. You may remember the things we were planning to do on Mothering Sunday got cancelled and postponed. So just be aware of the need people might have to feel really blessed on that day, because they're still alone and they still haven't seen, and some people for a year now not seen their mum, particularly those in care homes. Really want to think about that. What could you do that's the little blessing on Mothering Sunday? And maybe doing something on the days before as well, the Friday and Saturdays, to help people prepare. And also, gosh, this year it's a real day of mixed feelings for people, which leads me into the day of reflection as well. There's a huge amount of loss out there, and in the Church of England we've just done a massive piece of research into funerals and the impact of death and grief on our communities. And the most striking thing that came out of it, that we should have thought about but didn't realise, that was different from what we expected, is that the biggest impact of not being able to go to funerals, of the grief that people feel, is on the under 30s. And if you pause for a moment, it will make sense, because this is the generation that has lost grandparents and have had to step up sometimes and help parents and surviving grandparent to be involved, and yet not had the space to grieve themselves. So it's worth thinking about young adults as well at this time and communicating that this year. It's that grandparent generation that may have been really affected. So think about Mothering Sunday, and I would say think about how you use that domestic space quite a lot. What little thing could arrive with someone to use and to pray with at home? I've got a lovely picture of daffodils there, and of course one of the things is how much do we use daffodils in the next few months, because there's such a fabulous sign of hope. I buy daffodils all the time at this time of year, and of course for you on the 1st of March with St David's Day, daffodils are massively important as well. So you've got to use them quite often, and they do often end up being used on Mothering Sunday as a symbol. But this year, the Day of Reflection, the 23rd of March, spearheaded by Macmillan, but they've designed a very special logo, which is a stylised daffodil in many ways. And they want everyone to be reflecting on that day about the loss of people that's happened, but also the loss of lifestyle over the last year, the fact that people feel so much has gone missing for them, not just people, but the opportunity to be with people has gone as well. And there will be a lot of national messaging going on that day, both from the churches, and we are Churchwise Hope UK, Care for the Family are partners in this as well. So we're hoping that different churches across the country, different faith groups will be behind this as well. We'll be looking at resources, some coming from Marie Curie, some coming from other sources as well, encouraging people to make daffodils, put them in their windows, children to do things in school. It's going to be quite a big day, and it's already had some media exposure as well. So worth thinking about what that might look like and joined up in your community, and perhaps a bit more widely in the church in Wales as well. And then, of course, we get into, if you like, our days. Those are their days. Those are cultural days, but they're massively important times for people. And throughout this season now, we have to be thinking about grief and loss. It's huge, the impact of that. So every time we've got a celebration, we'll need to be bringing in that sense that there's something to remember, people to remember, something that isn't present, as well as people who are present. And even a day like Palm Sunday, which is a strange day, isn't it? And whenever I talk about Palm Sunday, my former Bishop Michael of Gloucester, who sadly died prematurely, he really didn't like it that Palm Sunday became the festival of the donkey all too easily. And yet the donkey is what resonates with people. But it's recapturing that sense. It's both a donkey and a cross. It is a Hosanna day, but it's actually a day that tells us there's shadows to the celebrations as well. So it's one of those things, the palm cross, that has a lot of cultural residual memory. So thinking about how do we help people to engage with that when we're doing our services, which will not be involving donkey processions this year, but there may be other ways of helping people to remember the donkey and the cross story. Not everyone even really knows the story of Palm Sunday, so it's a great time to think about creative ways of retelling it using digital media. And perhaps to get people to do something at home, like I said earlier. I think if you've got palm crosses, putting them in windows is a really good thing to do at that time. And it is surprising how many people remember having a palm cross and remember having seen a donkey. It may be that you get something else creative depending on what's possible, but I think you could do things that where donkeys and crosses maybe on a trail around your community that people can go and find. But by the time we're at Palm Sunday, which is the end of March, we're also needing to keep an eye on where the culture is at, what the messaging is about coming out of lockdown, because I think there's a sense in which people might want at this point to go straight past the pain and straight for the dawn of a new day. So balancing, it's going to be quite a sensitive task for us to balance all the time how we speak hope and how we acknowledge that Palm Sunday is the beginning of something very difficult, really helping us to remember that God is with us and enters into our pain and our suffering. And if we're able to make spaces during the Holy Week in our churchyards, in our open spaces, and even at that point, even for a little bit every day in our churches where people can come to pause and think, light a candle if they can, any of those things will be really helpful. This is where the story of the Christian story accepts the reality of pain in our lives could be a really good intersection with people's lives. And then, of course, we'll arrive at Maundy Thursday, and all sorts of interesting creative things will be happening that day, I know. But it struck me as a rather interesting opportunity this year that Maundy Thursday is on April the 1st. Every so often our Easter dates fall on April the 1st. So I was thinking it was a great opportunity to have a theme of foolish service, encouraging people on that day to be brave and bold and do something that blesses another person. One of the things I'm talking about, you won't be surprised to hear at the moment, is how will those who mourn know that they're blessed if we don't do some blessing? So maybe Maundy Thursday is a day to reach out and do that foot washing gesture, that humbling gesture, that benefits another person whom you know has struggled through this lockdown. Simple things, the little gift or the phone call or the message that you send. So encouraging everyone to connect with Maundy Thursday in a different way this year. And of course, we arrive at Good Friday. We'll have to think carefully about how we use that. Many of us have got graveyards, and there's something about, pondering mortality on Good Friday. It may be that you want to put up, or you probably will, put up a cross outside. How are you going to enable people to think about the cross on Good Friday? And also at the same time, having a space that does continually show that Easter garden that reminds us always that the resurrection is coming. And again, what can people do at home in their domestic space on Good Friday to mark that day? There are really old practices of fasting that help us to mark Good Friday, of making foods that have the mark of the cross on. I mean, hot cross buns have completely lost their significance because they're now on sale in every possible flavour imaginable. But I've seen one really interesting idea about baking through Holy Week, which could be a great idea to recapture and help people engage with the story at home. So look out for some of these creative ideas. If you haven't discovered it, there's a fantastic Facebook group called COVID, Lent, Holy Week and Easter, where people share some of these resources and creative ideas. So I encourage you, if you don't know that and you do use Facebook, to have a look at that particular group. And then, of course, we get to hooray, Easter Sunday. How are we really going to capture that as a mood of celebration? Hopefully, even if people, we're all still distanced and we're not gathering in the same way, I think visible signs of celebration are great. Traditionally, we all would fly a flag at the church, and people may not even know why we do that. So make sure we tell our communities why we do that. If we've got bunting, why not hang it up on this day? Find ways that people can engage in their own spaces with something that's happening around the Easter egg hunts, which people love to do. How can we make that happen? And let's hope and pray it is April the 3rd, so it could be snow again, but let's hope it feels like we're springing into hope and that people can have that real sense we've come to a turning point. That's what our prayer is, and we have to use this Lenten season to keep praying for that. But we do have to keep flexible in our thinking, because it isn't clear exactly where we'll be, and manage our messaging, manage people's expectations, but at the same time proclaim the good news, the absolute amazing good news of Easter, that in Christ death has lost its sting. It is not the end. And also remembering that Easter is a season. Are there holiday activities that you can do? Can you go beyond Easter, making those connections with your community? Easter is the season. Those contacts you've made, asking those questions. If you're making contacts with your community, with people who may have not had as much contact this year with church, fringe people, wedding couples that are in the pipeline, as it were, new babies that have arrived in the last year that you haven't made contact with in your community, can you make contact with them, and can you keep in contact with them as we go forward? How are you going to see them again, having made contact at Easter? And who is going to make sure that contact happens? I always say when we're meeting people, however we're meeting them, make sure you're thinking about noticing who's new. This can get hard with digital church. If you do Zoom church, if someone's new or not new to you, someone will have given them the link, so you've got a contact. If you're doing streamed church, it does require people to be actively noticing whether people are making connections with you in that service, and making sure there's good information out there for them to follow through. It's great to see you here. If you want to know more about this church, just here's where to go next. Here's our website. Here's how to contact us. So notice people who are around. And however you do that, it can feel very strange to do smiling when we've got masks on. But people can see us reflect the kindness of God in the words that we use when we are hidden behind our mask, and indeed in our eyes when we do see people face to face, and the tone of our voice that reflects kindness in all that we do. Making those connections, as I've said, and making sure we invite people on their journey of faith, that friendship journey that we want them to be on. We communicate with people, very important if we want people to engage, including those who regularly come to church, because we're building that continuing relationship. And I said earlier that I'd had something through the post this week, and it was very interesting because a great example of keeping in touch in a different way. It's not always easy for churches to keep in touch, and I'm not a parish priest, and I don't have my own worshipping. I help with a couple of churches, but this package arrived, and it was very lovely. It's a set of prayers to use at home during Lent, and it's got a lovely card in it with a cross that's ashed on the front, and it says, "This card has been ashed for you personally," which felt really lovely. And at first I couldn't work out who it was, and then I realized it was from in fact it was from Tewkesbury Abbey, which is a church that I only go to time. I help there occasionally because I've done some preaching for them and done some filming for them, but that's it. And yet they've taken the trouble to contact me to say I'm valuable to them by sending me their Lent resources. And it meant a lot to me. And it made me think again, how important is it that we keep in touch with people and make those contacts, give them that invitation, invite them to the things that are happening, giving them the right information to get in touch if they want to, and then having that opportunity to be interested in them, and where possible, invite them to get involved. We may not be able to do that yet, but we can store that up for the future. I'm not going to tell you about the Church Support Hub. You hopefully know about it. We haven't got a specific Easter page as yet, but soon we will have. And that brings me very perfectly towards the end of our time, as I remind you that whole sense of this is about, hopefully, that our confidence at Easter, in Lent, Holy Week and Easter, it is not in our abilities, but in that incredible message we have, that in Jesus, God so loved the world, as we'll that he gave his only son so that we may have life. That's what we're trusting in. And you're all doing a great job wherever you are throughout Wales. You're doing a great job, and you will be able to make this journey, even though it feels hard as we do it for a second time. We know we can do it, and God has been faithful to us and will continue to be faithful. And you will become memory makers for people as they look back on the Easter, the Lent that was so different that it stands out for the future. So Chris, I'll end right there and stop screen sharing.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Sandra. I've had steam coming off my pen all afternoon so far, writing things down and making some notes. So people have been busy posting some questions as well. So if it's okay, I just want to go through some of these.
I might not know the answers, but I'll always think of it.
Well, we have a go. So we have a go. Some of them are quite generic, actually. So I know we're talking specifically about sort of Holy Week and Easter and build up at the moment, but some of these are relevant questions in other times, but particularly pertinent coming up to Easter. So they're all anonymous. So you're obviously a very shy lot out there this afternoon. But the first question, do you think schools would welcome us getting in touch this year? You mentioned about schools and in Wales,
partnerships,
schools going back. So obviously behind that question, I guess, is would schools welcome approaches from us this year?
Do you know, one of the things about approaching people, isn't it, is it often takes courage, because we all assume that nobody wants to hear from us. The worst that would happen is they'll say, "Oh, thank you so much, but we really don't need you." But if we don't ask, we'll never know. And right now, for whatever, even if it's as simple, if you don't have an existing relationship with a school, even if it's as simple as saying, "We are going to be praying for you. Are there some real needs that you've got at the moment? How can we best pray for you as a school this Lent, Holy Week, Easter?" And then we establish a relationship. There may be, another simple thing. You may already, you may say to church, we're wondering how we can, I think the thing to say is, we're wondering how we can best help you at this time. Not, what we do a lot as the church is say, "Here's our thing. We'll give it to you." And people say, "Oh, I'm sorry, we've already got our thing. We've already thought of our thing. We're not interested in your thing." And what we're really trying to do is to say, we know you've got a thing to deliver because you've got to try and deliver. And many of our schools do want to tell the Christian story at this time. We know you've got this task. How can we help you do it? How can we help you do pastoral care for young people at the moment, which is what prayer is part of as well. So I would say, you can't, the worst that could happen is they're going to say, "No, thank you." But quite honestly, right now, most people are just grateful that we care.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a brilliant approach, actually. Even if with social distancing, etc., we're not able to kind of invite churches down and schools down to church or go to schools, just asking what we can do. Can we reinforce you in some way? Can we pray for you?
Yeah.
I mean, who does?
Yeah, praying is good. And someone's just talking about Open the Book, which is a great thing. And they've created videos to offer. they might be able to do. Or you might be the other way around. You might be able to say to the school, we would really like to have some videos up during Holy Week. Would the school like to do us a little 2-minute thing that we could share? You know, so it can work both ways. We might be able to provide them with something, they might be able to provide us with something. So, and although we can't go in physically, we can go to a huge, gosh, it's amazing where we can go on Zoom now, isn't it? You know, we can hear all sorts of things. One of my little things I did recently, not churchy at all, I've just discovered Instagram Live, and you can go to some really interesting things there. So we are, one of the blessings of this time is we are not limited to our physical presence. So, you know, I'm just become involved with the St John's Ambulance as county chaplain, and I can go by Zoom to visit a little online cadet meeting.
I know it's
amazing,
isn't it? It's just I think you mentioned when you were talking earlier that different doesn't necessarily mean as good.
It doesn't mean different, doesn't mean worse. It just means different, and doing that differently, going to the school by Zoom, doesn't mean it's inadequate compared with when you'd have gone in person. It might turn out to be more adequate.
I think that's how we feel, though, isn't it? We feel if we can't do what we've always done, somehow we're not quite hitting the mark. Somehow we're not serving people as they should be served. But sometimes, as you say, it's just about being creative, and that necessity just helping us to be innovative. Yeah,
and I guess as priests, we're formed, aren't we, to be so much in that, for a lot of us, that incarnational model of priesthood. You know, we're in the midst with people, we're listening to them, we're alongside them on their journeys, and so we feel that when we do it in this slightly peculiar way of being, you know, I'm in my space, you're in yours now, it isn't the same. But actually it turns out that we carry, you know, priesthood is more than that. It is who it sort of works. It works through Zoom.
I mean, thank you to Anthony for posting that. And I mean, there may be people out there that are thinking, well, actually, we do X, Y, and Z. Well, again, just pop that in the chat and share that, because what you're doing, somebody else may not have thought of, but it's a thing for them. Now, another question here, and again, the relevance to Easter, but it's relevant every week as well. Do you think people will still be nervous about coming to church, even if our buildings might be open?
Well, Pete, we can't generalise on that, because I think one of the things we've learned, certainly one of the things I've learned in this last year, is that just like every other, you know, personality process profile, there's a spectrum of behaviours. Just as there's people who find it easier to be alone and people who have found that very hard. You know, there's a spectrum, and there's a spectrum of risk tolerance, I would say. So there's people who are seriously risk averse, and there's people who are more risk tolerant, is the word that I use to describe it. So just as there are people who still won't go to the supermarket, you know, there will be people who will feel anxious about coming in church, but there'll be other people who are really ready to do that. And if you've got people in your community and in your, you know, the crossover in your church congregation who are happily going out to the supermarket once a week, or popping down to the local shop to pick something up, those people should feel confident about coming in church, as long as you've got all the you know, the health and safety in place. You will know there's others in your congregation who as yet are really still not venturing out, you know, who may still be putting their deliveries into quarantine for 72 hours. You know, there are people, and they're not the ones who are going to feel excited about it. And we must be careful not to pressurize people into coming who don't feel comfortable. So it is a little bit of pastoral care in knowing what's right and giving people the freedom to make that choice that is right for them. I do think there are people who are ready now to say, I would come into that space, you know, and there'll be others who won't be ready.
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, a lot of the people on our webinar this afternoon are ministers, church leaders, either ordained or lay ministers, but active in leading their church. So I was talking to somebody last week who said, you know what, I'm really looking forward to my church being open again, but in terms of workload, it just feels like it's going to get busier still, because I want to open church for people that want to go, but actually what do I do about the stuff we've already got going for people who are not ready to go back to church yet.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what do you say to people, ministers who are anxious about that workload, keeping their online stuff, but actually having to kind of open?
It is extraordinarily difficult, and I think lots of people are in that situation. The church I most help with is in that situation where we are ending up doing both things. You will end, well, not at the moment we're not, but we will end up being, for a while we'll end up doing, a physical service at 10 o'clock and a Zoom service at 11:15. That's the pattern we got into, and it does feel like more work. Although I would say keep it simple. Don't multiply too many things, and replicate as much as you can to make it possible. And hopefully, I think the desire from all our governments, as yours or the one in England, is that confidence will be growing. I think the trajectory that everyone wants to be on, although everything is unpredictable, isn't it, is one that it will be incremental steps that open up more, rather than nobody wants to be going into this stop-start feel. So we could hope that will be quite a short-lived measure, that we will get to the point where we can offer one kind. Other people may actually want to make the decision that what they're doing online is valid and good. Yeah. And that's fine, and keep that going for longer. But it is hard. It is hard. And I don't think there's any shortcut through that. But just to say, do what you can, what you can't, and keep it simple.
Yeah, again, one of the key things I wrote down from was do what you can and not what you can't. But we tend to, don't we, about the bits that we can't. As a lady vicar that's speaking next week on our webinar, because last year during Holy Week, she made a series of kind of at-home videos in her study and put one out each evening in Holy Week. And it was all a bit messy, she said, and not very technical, but actually it just made people feel involved.
Yeah.
So even though she was worried about the technology side of it, she did it. And actually people really valued that because she did what she could.
I think people have learned quite a lot about, the grace of accepting the way we do things. Everyone's got much better knowing that things don't work sometimes. And, your toddler comes into your service, or your cat barks. That's always a really good, actually, for YouTube. If your cat barks, you should definitely be recording that moment. But we've all got used to that, haven't we? That, actually, we don't have to deliver perfection all the time. But somebody just also put an important comment on here about opening up. We've also, I feel we've also learned quite a bit this year about, it always sounds a bit patronizing, this phrase, but St. Paul talks about how we prefer our weaker friends and fellow travelers with us, on our fellow pilgrims. So how do we've learned that? So what we have to think about is, I might be ready, I might not be anxious about stopping and chatting to someone on the street at a distance, but the person walking towards me might be highly anxious about it, and I need to prefer them. So we've got in our churches, not just ourselves as ministers, but we rely, don't we, so much on volunteers, on people expressing their ministry through service to us. And one of the dangers is we pressure them without, we don't always realize how much power we blooming have as ministers. We don't realize that if we say the church is open, our dear lovely older people will think they have to come and help us because we've said, and we don't realize that we have that kind of power. We don't mean it, and we just want to, if you want to, but the weighting is our favour, if you like. If we say it's okay, they'll think they must do it. So we've got to be really careful how we make sure our volunteers are genuinely free to make a choice to come or not come, and don't feel in any way that just because we do something, they now have to do something. It's really hard, but we have to try and do that. But hopefully confidence grows. The vaccination programme has been a huge success in England. I'm afraid I'm ignorant on the story in Wales. Let's hope it was a success as well. But it's a huge success, and it will only continue to give people that growing confidence. We will get to a point. There will be people who remain uncertain for a long, long time now, and we'll have to nurture them. But hopefully there'll be a growing swell of confidence as we journey through the rest of this year, not just Easter, but beyond.
I mean, what's really encouraging, just looking at some of the comments coming through on the chat there, just how creative people have been.
It's amazing, Chris.
We couldn't imagine this world 18 months ago, could we? Let's be honest.
Sometimes I have this feeling that I'm actually in a dream, but I'm sure we're all having that at the moment. But honestly, God stirs up in us the gifts that we need, and people have drawn on an incredible amount of creativity, of adapting things, of drawing on each other's ideas, making them work in their locality, in all sorts of ways. And it's extraordinary what people can do, and really, really just keep thinking about that. And that whole, people are saying about the elderly people who find it hard to get out. Our creativity then comes about really think hard about what can you give them in their domestic space. A card with a prayer on. I'm not an old lady, by the way, but I love this card that came from Tewkesbury Abbey. I was like, isn't that lovely? And I can sit here on Ash Wednesday and pray this prayer.
And we underestimate that, don't we, Sandra?
Absolutely, we underestimate it.
Somebody's thinking of you,
and they've said to you, here's a pressed daffodil, take this out and say this prayer for our nation on St. David's Day, whatever it's going to be, but do the thing, and give them that little prayer on that day, and use the post for people. If you can't get physically round to drop things off.
Absolutely, sometimes it's going. I've talked to one minister in North Wales, and she was saying one thing I did when lockdown came in was I went out and bought a pile of envelopes, writing paper and stamps, because I just realised people are going to love just a letter, just a little handwritten note dropping through the letterbox every couple of weeks from the vicar.
Yeah, or if they're in a different age group and they use, actually we shouldn't say about age groups, because one of my most active people on WhatsApp is a couple of 80-year-olds who are on WhatsApp, and they're always on it and they comment on absolutely everything. They're my busiest WhatsApp channel, and just suddenly someone just dropping them a message saying, thinking of you today, how's it going? All of that is so important. That's when I said about foolish service on Maundy Thursday. If we haven't done it at all before then, that's a really good day to make an effort to serve people in these new ways of making contact, I think.
You were talking earlier about looking at the space that we've got, whether that's sort of internal space in church or outside space, or whether it's digital space. So I'm just reading I think it was Jane said, they're planning to stage a life-sized Easter tableau in the churchyard.
Yeah,
that's brilliant. And what strikes me, Sandra, is kind of we often plan our services every week of the year, not just Easter or Christmas or whenever, and we pile in and we close the doors. So this is forcing us to be accessible, and that has to be a good thing.
My dream church, if you like, my ideal church has always been based a little bit on not name dropping here, but a time I spent in Fiji with the church, and the church literally had no walls. It was a roof, and people came and went all the time around the edges. If you got a baby in there, you just walked in and out. The fluid edges were amazing. And in my head, my ideal church has always been like that, a fluid space, that people could just touch and move in and out of as they needed. And now we have this amazing moment, as you say, to come out of our buildings into our communities, to put our story in a way that people didn't even know. But make sure you tell people what it is, because people don't know this story very well. In the way they all know what to expect with the baby Jesus in the crib, but they're not at all sure what this story is. So in terms of communicating to your community, make sure you've got some helpful things that people say, oh, I didn't know that happened. I remember once there was an outdoor tableau in the Cathedral Close here in Gloucester a few years ago, and it had been around the town, and then it was outside, and literally they were acting out the bit where Jesus went onto the cross. And a woman ran through the crowd with her camera up, shouting into her camera, "Oh my God, I can't believe it. They're killing a man outside the cathedral." And she had no knowledge of this story. It was an extraordinary moment. And
powerful moment by the sounds of it.
Yeah, it was, and everybody stopped and started looking at this woman. She was taking a picture of it as she was shouting in her phone, "I can't believe this is what's happening." And it's a play. But she didn't know this story, and she, she wasn't a young woman or anything. She was just a woman who no longer knew. And I just think we forget that people don't know this story. So we might have to help them to know when we put our tableau up, who's it for, and how will they know what it refers to?
I think for me, one of the most powerful things that you highlighted this afternoon is kind of this fast forward. People tend to go from Palm Sunday, which kind of feels like celebration in a lot of churches. Palm Sunday,
weird.
Exactly, with the palms and the donkeys and all that kind of stuff. And then they're next in church Easter Sunday, which is obviously the great celebration. And in between, you have this incredible journey of loss and pain and grief and heartache and misunderstanding. And I always thought people lost so much of the Easter story when they cut out Holy Week. Now, this year's going to be different. It's going to be difficult in lots of ways. We can't do what perhaps we traditionally do on Maundy Thursday. We can't do traditionally what we do on Good Friday. But you made that point that of all years, this is the year to reflect on that pain and the grief and the loss. So how can we really make Holy Week special this year, Sandra, to make sure that people do that?
Well, again, Chris, I think we have to think about who it is you're doing each thing for. So, there are things that connect with those of us that are already on our faith journey and for whom the story has a deep resonance. So there are those things, and many of us are able to do those things and engage with the story in fresh ways at home, but actually for other people for whom they're not used to engaging with it, I would say it's the time to acknowledge and speak about, or what's the line in the hymn, all our pains and griefs he bears. That actually each day there might be a sense of, today we're thinking about the way in which part of what Jesus bears for us is not seeing people, the isolation on the cross, or your friends, you're not there, or the physicality of things, the fact that actually there's physical suffering, there's humiliation that comes in. There might be all sorts of things, but just I think possibly if you are able to have a little quiet corner, you might tell people again, you've got to know where we're at in terms of what's possible, but or it's a quiet corner in your own garden. Take a quiet corner each day and just know that God is with you in your pain on this. It's as simple as that. And I would go, as I say, Maundy Thursday. I personally do like this idea of it being the 1st of April Fool's Day, helping people to just say, we've been thinking how difficult it is, but how do we get alongside and bless those who are struggling this day? Stepping out of our comfort zone, because that's what all of that was about. Peter was out of his comfort zone in receiving the foot washing. Jesus was doing something he wasn't meant to be doing as the teacher. What can we do on Maundy Thursday? So, there might be just thinking a bit, keep thinking about spaces that people might use on those days, I think. And someone's just put up about sending little bars of notes.
Just reading that.
It's a great idea. It's a great idea. And they're not difficult to get, these things. We can all find the surprising amount of, different bits and pieces to send to people.
A couple of questions that people have asked, fairly generic ones about generally about the pandemic and how we can sort of care for people in residential homes. How we can,
that's a really important one. The residential homes, really important.
And young people particularly with particular burdens. So obviously these issues that have been relevant right through the pandemic and they're still relevant now. I know we're running short of time, so. You mentioned a Facebook page earlier, Sandra.
Yeah, I did. It's a Facebook group called COVID Lent, Holy Week and Easter.
I think, Veronica, are you able to pop that link up? I think we've found that.
We found it.
You pop that in.
It's if you haven't found it, it's probably worth a look at.
Right, there we go. I think
that's St. Padden's digital ministry webinar.
Right, so have we got a Facebook page that we can put up there, Veronica?
It's called.
Dig that out.
COVID Lent,
there we go.
Week and Easter.
That's the one.
Sure,
I think that's the one.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one.
There we go. Somebody'd asked for that. Kerry, you've asked.
You have to be able to join it, but there are people who can join, and there's 2,500 people in it, and it will just say it's got resources in it, you know, and people can share things on there. So it's worth a look at if you're a Facebook user.
There we are. I mean, you know, I've just a very quick
Yeah.
look while you mentioned it there, and there's some.
If you're a Facebook user, you should be able to join it.
Kerry's asked the PowerPoint that you used this afternoon, Sandra. Are you able to make that available?
Yeah, I'll send it to you and you make it available.
Right, so there we are. So we'll put that on the St. Padon's website.
You can have that because it's like my notes, really.
I mean, again, final question here. It's quite a big final question. Theologically, this Easter is going to be very different. How can we ensure our church practice reflects this new, diversified and unique environment we find ourselves in?
Say that again.
Theologically,
oh yeah,
is going to be very different. How can we ensure our church practice reflects this new, diversified and unique environment we find ourselves in?
It's very interesting. And actually, in some ways, I think theologically it's the same message. we haven't got a new story for Easter. We haven't got to make a new story yet. We have got this incredible story. But the amazing thing about the richness of our stories is that the theological thinking we do means that we find new depths or new facets to it. You know, I sometimes think, you know, our faith is like one of those kind of multifaceted diamond or Swarovski crystals, and we look at it from one angle all the time, and then every so often sometimes it makes it move, and then we're looking at it in a completely different way. And what we're in is a season where we're being, you know, forced to theologically reflect on the core story and on our church story and on our cultural story in new ways to give us a new focus for this year. And that's really what we're doing. And I think for each of us in our context, it might be slightly different. I've been drawn back recently. This is not so much about Easter, but just more generally, to one of the biblical stories that's underpinned all my work has been the parable of the sower. And you know, this year I felt that God said, stop thinking about the soil and stop thinking about the seed and stop thinking about the process of sowing, and just think about the sower. Just think about who the sower is. And I think other people are saying that's calling back to what is at the heart of our heart of what we do, this incredible message of God's love for the world revealed in Jesus. And what we have is these opportunities to share that, the wonder of that, as you say, with creativity, not necessarily in anything elaborate, but in this simple beauty of what that message is, the heart of it for people. And yes, we're being asked to draw on new skills and so on, and we'll all have to reflect on how we do that in our particular context. I have seen churches doing really, another church I know is, some of us have got the most amazing things like Stations of the Cross in our churches, or stained glass that tells the story. So they've been taking those pictures of that and then sharing that, so people are focusing on the story through what we've already got, you know. So we're just tuning that, how we present it. But the heart of this is that confidence we have that this is the story that we trust in, and it's a story of hope.
It's a good news story, isn't it?
It's a good news story. So that hopefully it will be good if it dovetails with what's happening in our culture, and it dovetails with what happens in creation every year. But we have to learn to wrestle with it as well, so that we tell it in a way that makes sense for proclaiming afresh in every generation, this generation, what good news will look like.
Fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I do love my little trips to Wales. I'm so looking forward to coming for real.
I know. But actually, you know, would we have gone down the route with these webinars if we hadn't sort of had to adapt these kind of things? So I mean,
no, we probably wouldn't. And that's the thing. We've been able to do things in a you know, we do miss being face to face, but it has allowed us to connect in different ways with different people, hasn't it? So
yeah, well, not just my thanks, but thanks from everybody I know that's joined the webinar.
That's good. Thank you.
You've given us lots to think about, as always. Some great,
and people are always welcome, Chris, to email me as well about anything. As you know, they can find me on the Church of England, and I usually
brilliant. So as we said, so this has been recorded, so that will be on St. Padon's website within a couple of days. Sandra will send us the PowerPoint as well, so all of the things that she's covered will be there. We'll put that Facebook page link up there as well. Just a reminder that we're back here next Tuesday afternoon. That's the 23rd, again at 2 o'clock. Dr. Peter Phillips will be here talking to us and sharing some resources from Premier Digital about particularly online resources, but then we're talking to several other ministers right across Wales about what they did in their churches last year, what they're planning on doing this year, sharing some resources and ideas. And just a reminder that all of these are on the digital webinar part of the St. Padon's website. Thank you very, very much for joining us again this afternoon, and hope to see you, if not next week, then sometime soon. Take care. Bye bye.
They all gone.
I think they're leaving as we speak.